We had a pretty large bang associated with the caution and warning now. Okay, as we have an apparent serious oxygen leak.
4, 3, 2, 1.
Houston, we've had a problem. He's in a roll and he can't stop it. Performing an evasive maneuver. Okay, Houston, we've had a problem here. I think we need to do a little more all-weather testing.
Welcome to space.
Hello, listener, and welcome to Failure to Launch, the space history podcast where we take you through every mistake, failure, and explosion that made modern space exploration possible. We are your hosts, Quinn, he, him.
Chris, he, him.
And one of many Chris's, he, him.
And today we're going to talk about Dumitru Prunariu, the first Romanian in space, and how his government punished him for being too cool. So, guys, how are you all doing? I feel like it's been a while since we had like a Just Us history episode, you know?
I like doing that. It lets me recharge my social battery.
Yeah. We don't have any guests. We don't have a reason to like maintain appearances or seem more professional than we are. We're just gonna like metaphorically for you, the audience, let it all hang loose. So what's up? What are some highlights? Anyone have any?
All right, Mom. Jesus Christ.
Doing childhood play dates, but it's for your child, like your child's podcast to make sure they're doing enough parasocial play dates.
I don't know, man. It's just been kind of. I'm doing fine. I've just been doing my usual, you know.
For context, audience, other Chris has just sent something to the group chat. It is a picture of what looks like a black leaf. Knowing him, did this come out of your body, and if so, what limb?
No, this came out of a part and is partially responsible for my continued lack of care for FOD.
Oh boy, audience, we're into the NDA corner. If you work in an engineering field, close your ears right now or you may be legally liable to learn about this.
I just sat with a dental pick and poked that 2-inch long flake off of a part.
Jesus, what the fuck even is that? Yeah, it looks like if you carbonized a leaf, you know?
So that is inking out, by the way.
Fun times.
Yeah, no, that was just sitting in there. So now I get to come back in on Monday and realize they scrapped the part because someone took a drill to try and work the rest of it out and violated every dimension possible.
But yeah, audience, know that whenever we get mad or we scream about FOD or bad QA or anything else that has happened in space history, that continues to happen in engineering history today.
Oh, yes, it does.
It's a quintessential part of engineering culture to continue to deploy FOD.
Honestly, yeah. I have hope then that, whenever we're replaced by generative models, those things fuck up all the time. They are going to carry the engineering tradition forward.
No, the AI is just going to let, a nice chunk of stray metal fly into a turbo pump.
Hell yeah. Of course it will. Because that's what I would have done.
Deliberately sabotage.
Oh god, yeah. Trying to make an AI that can replace an engineer, but having to train it on an engineer that hasn't fucked up horribly in some way. Can we find the one blameless engineer on which to base this model?
He who is without an RMA shall cast the first stone. Or she. Or they.
I do like the idea of that being something that sticks with you like a fucking arrest record. I hope I'm able to get out of jury duty one day by just showing the RMA that I have against a part I made 15 years ago.
Hi, I'm Chris for Engineers Anonymous.
I thought it was a thou, but it was a micrometer. Sorry.
Can't believe you'd want to get out of jury duty. But if it's a really interesting case.
Can I do that if I'm called for jury duty? Can I just request all right, but here's my list. They have to be sick nasty. Murder qualifies. The more murders, the better. If
Murder,
it's any of that boring
I'm just
shit,
down for it. Get me in there.
If it's any boring shit, I'm just telling you, not guilty. That's I'm just gonna say that over and over.
I will stall these proceedings.
Now, speaking of stalling, that actually doesn't line up. Speaking of Stalin, speaking of the Socialist Republic of Romania, beautiful segue, Quinn. Thank you, Quinn. That's something that we are familiar with, right, guys? I know we've got some various like Hoi 4 players in the chat right now. Although I guess that's like not Cold War. I don't know. You've played some Cold War mods. Whatever. Sue me. Socialist Republic of Romania. Romania from the period of World War II to about the fall of the Soviet Union. Just like this weird Warsaw Pact communist country. This country that was like uniquely independent among Warsaw Pact members, with a leader who truly ranks among the greats of zany, evil dictators. Nicolae Ceausescu. Nicolae, whatever.
Oh, some of his early portraits, pretty good hair.
That's just any communist dictator, or any dictator at the end of the day. Like, you can get your portrait touched up. You can get like all of any like 90-year-old communist general secretary getting their like fist-sized pores airbrushed out of the official portraits.
Actually, now that I'm looking at it, it looks more like a single piece that can just be lifted off like
God, yeah, he does have Lego hair.
I was gonna say the Lego Man hair that you can just, and it comes right
and
off.
His head, other than the hair, does look like perfectly cylindrical. Like you could just pop something on and off. Yeah, all right.
Oh, and the dead soulless eyes. I cannot wait for what we're gonna discuss.
Damn, I spoiled myself on just him specifically.
What, spoiled yourself like looking at him or just learning about him?
Well, I mean, I learned something about him. I learned how very briefly. I mean, I learned how he ends. So.
Oh yeah, fun times.
Yeah, the wall was not kind to him.
Not upside down though, so I think Mussolini still has him beat. Just for like
but he became a
noteworthiness.
colander. That part you might have to get rid of.
I think we've said worse things on this show before.
Some demographic of our fans are instantly just like Ceausescu loyalists and are incredibly pissed off that we don't like him.
Wait, Chris, that reminded me of the meme that you sent me of like the Somali nicknames. And the one guy who is named Bastomir or whatever, he's pasta strainer because he got shot like 16 times.
Fuck. When did he get that nickname, I wonder? You know, like at what number of bullet wounds did they give? And is that predictive programming? That the guy who gets named Pasta Strainer, like they give him that after 8 bullet wounds and then he gets shot 8 more times.
And it just reinforces the nickname. Like he is never getting away from that.
Now, today we are going to be talking about the story of communist Romania's first cosmonaut and how he fell from grace for being more popular than the dictator's wife.
I was looking forward to this the moment you mentioned it to me, so.
Hell yeah.
Just Elena Ceausescu getting pissed off.
Elena Ceausescu finding the one person with scientific qualifications that she can't actually just steal credit from. She, like, cannot actually just go to the papers and say, like, yeah, that was me. I am Romania's first cosmonaut. That was me on Salyut 6 that one time.
I touched space. Oddly soup-like.
Also, the main source I used for this story is the book Interkosmos, the Eastern Bloc's early space program by Colin Burgess and Bert. As always, links will be in the show notes, and I would recommend checking out the book, if only because the foreword is written by the guy that we are about to talk about.
The Interkosmos program.
So, for this whole story to make sense, I need to explain the Interkosmos program to you guys. Which was, I think we've talked about this a couple of times, it was effectively Soviet space carpooling. Announced in 1976, the program would allow Soviet allies to train and launch their own countrymen as research cosmonauts. From start to finish, Interkosmos would allow 15 countries to launch their first citizen into orbit. And unfortunately, like most things Cold War, it also had a strong propaganda angle. As the only socialist country that could launch humans into orbit, the Soviet Union, like, they got to present themselves like they are the patron, they are unlocking the cosmos, and critically, they are allowing their allies to reap the benefits of all of their, like, rocket work. And in fairness, this was also done a lot with the US. What countries got to join was also a load of fun inner circle politics, like the fact that France got to fly a cosmonaut before many socialist countries. Just depends on like how valuable you are and how much the Soviets like you that minute.
That's BS. Get some brand cachet by inviting the French along.
Yeah, and it's also going to factor in here because Romania is one of the last socialist countries to fly, partially because the Soviets don't like them. So like their punishment is like, fuck you, back of the line.
Gotta say, we're friends first.
Kiss the fucking ring, Nicolae.
Just jamming it into his face.
And while Interkosmos is rightly remembered as one of the greatest examples of cooperation in space history, it was actually started for purely pragmatic reasons that I really love. In the 70s, after the collapse of the Soviet manned lunar program, the Soviet manned space program overall settled into a cozy pattern of launching Salyut and Almaz space stations into orbit and sending cosmonauts up to crew them for a few months at a time. This was just kind of like the norm for them for a couple of years. Ideally, a crew would launch in a Soyuz spacecraft and take that same ship home when they were done. If they needed more supplies, an unmanned Progress cargo ship could be launched to the station filled with food or air or cognac or whatever the crew needed most.
God, you need the cognac.
You do need that. And again, gotta be Armenian. For some reason, that is the drink of choice in space.
It's because they make good cognac, obviously.
Fuck off,
Who's
Paisley. That's my mic
bee?
stand. For what it's worth, audience, you can't see this. I physically have my elbow up trying to shove my cat away from my microphone. And she is not taking the hint.
You're listening to actual pitched combat.
You need to understand, she's figured out that the microphone is an attention getter. This cat knows that the escape key on my keyboard, that's a great attention button. Hitting the microphone, it also gets attention.
I might be going down a hole with this one.
Oh no.
But you know how when you have Parmesan cheese, it can't be branded as Parmesan cheese unless it's actually from Italy, right? They have there's the
some
whole
champagne kind of deal.
I'm not super familiar with what the laws are, and I'm pretty sure it's an EU law thing that Italy really pushed for. Was for products that are made in Italy, they need to actually be from Italy. You can't take the name of a I don't know, a Parmesan or prosciutto product or whatever.
Boston Pizza's about to get so sued.
But anyway, mentioning Armenian cognac, I'm what could they do the same thing? What if they did the same thing? What if you can't have a cognac product unless it's from Armenia?
What if we do some the Spaceman, those kinds of advertisements where every time someone has to drink smuggled Armenian cognac, they have to look at the camera in the ISS and give a little thumbs up.
It's just it's like a branding thing, right? It's not nobody could feasibly stop you from making your raw milk, your unpasteurized milk cheese in your own home. But
okay, for a second there, I thought you were describing cognac. I have no idea how different alcohols are made, and I was just whoa, is that actually how cognac is made?
I definitely don't think that involves cheese.
Just forcing out you might have to cut this, but just forcing the Azerbaijani astronaut to drink the Armenian cognac and sing it into the camera.
Do the jingle. Do the jingle.
Do the fucking jingle!
Considering how much of our audience is peeled off of Lions Led by Donkeys, I don't think we have many Azeri nationalists in the audience. Sound off below so I can ban you.
So you can be ejected out the airlock.
Although, yeah, it would be fun if we could, make it a contract that the only alcohol allowed on the ISS has to be Ararat brand Armenian brandy or cognac or whatever.
Well, if it's our off-brand, it's not Armenian. They could sue us if that was the way the system worked. If they owned the rights to call something Armenian cognac, you know what I'm saying? It keeps the jobs in Armenia to make the legitimate Armenian cognac, and everything else is just kind of a cheap knockoff, which is why, it's when I buy my Parmesan cheese, it's got to be from Italy.
I agree completely, but they have to remain traditional as they are now, which means they have to be smuggled into space. They cannot be allowed normally. You have to smuggle the Parmesan up into space.
Yeah, the time-honored tradition of smuggling cognac into space.
Oh, and we have a great space smuggling story in this one. I'm very excited about this one, because smuggling is always no agency wants to talk about it, and the astronauts don't want to share their secrets. This one, however, we do have a very good start to finish how space smuggling happens.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah. Basically, yeah, through the 70s, 80s, the norm for the Soviet manned space program was launching people up to a kind of series of Salyut and Almaz stations. Almaz, they were all known as Salyut because Almaz were kind of secret military stations that were hidden within the civilian Salyut program. Also, one of them had a gun on it. If you want to learn more about that, go back and listen to our series or our episode with Lions Led by Donkeys talking about all of the ways that the Soviets tried to militarize space. But yeah, Originally, whenever missions were small, it would just work that a crew would go up on a spacecraft and they would come back down. Nice and simple. But as the Soviets got better at space stations, the length of the missions actually outpaced the lifespan of a Soyuz spacecraft, which is rated for 100 days in orbit. Past that, the batteries, electronics, and even the fuel would degrade, potentially degrading enough to be a severe risk to the crew. So their first solution was just to launch a new Soyuz up to the crew every now and then, keeping it fresh enough that the crew could safely get home. The replacement would carry up new experiments, news, personal items, that kind of stuff. Like, it would basically just be an unmanned cargo ship, but made out of a Soyuz instead of a Progress, if that makes sense. While the original Soyuz would just be loaded up with whatever experiments, and they would just send it down on its own. Now, this worked, but it was incredibly wasteful. The Soviets would have to launch multiple spacecraft just to support 2 or 3 guys on a station, not to mention how they would actually have to juggle the space station's docking ports. Like, later Salyut stations had 2 docking ports, one at the front and one at the back. So if you had the old Soyuz, the new Soyuz, and an unmanned Progress cargo craft in orbit at the same time, you would have to do some, like, weird parking to make sure that everyone, like, to make sure that it could all work. They occasionally had more ships than they did parking spots.
Did they just have to float near one another until the parking spot became available?
Yeah, or they would have to, like, all right, well, now's the time we ditch the old Soyuz, send it down right now a little early, and then we dock the new one, and then the Progress can come in. Or sometimes it would be like, yeah, one is floating nearby, everybody has to, like, really quickly unload the cargo craft, throw all the trash in, send it out, as soon as possible. Now, the Interkosmos program didn't necessarily solve this problem, but it was a damage mitigation strategy. The Soviets realized that if they launched the replacement Soyuzes with people, those cosmonauts could do a little bit of extra work on the station and maybe raise some morale, and then they would be the ones to ride the old Soyuz home. I do want to be clear, the plan was not to replace the old crew. You would have a situation where one crew would stay in orbit for like several months or up to a year, and every 2 months or so, they would just get a fun little visit for some other cosmonauts who would hang out for like 4 days and then leave.
Just rolling up there, hey guys, what's up?
Which is kind of cool when you consider that it's basically just like a subscription service that delivers you a spacecraft every now and then. The downside is you do have to hang out with Yevgeny, who only shows up. He's kind of like an annoying uncle, He shows up, he gets in the way of your work. He thinks he's helping, but he doesn't have the experience to actually help out, so he just kind of gets in the way.
Just lightly pissing everyone off the entire time.
Yeah, you're just sitting there like, man, I am going to be so glad when you are gone in 48 hours. And it is also worth mentioning that those cosmonauts going on the week-long missions, they also didn't like it because they signed up to be fucking cosmonauts. They signed up to be the guys living on the station for a year. They did not sign up to fly a spacecraft up, hang out for a little bit, and then just shuttle an old one down. That's all they were doing.
Space delivery truck drivers. Like we talked about.
Yeah, honestly, they were space truckers, except they had, like, the worst deal. Now, I'm going to quote from the Interkosmos book here. Sending 2 Soviet cosmonauts was seen as an unnecessary waste of resources. Instead, it was felt that some useful science could be carried out in the few days that this fresh crew would be present on the Salyut station. Thoughts then turned to sending up non-cosmonaut researchers. Obviously, the commander would be a Soviet cosmonaut, and the person in the second seat need only be given minimal training to cope with any in-flight emergencies or the incapacitation of the flight commander. And then someone in the PR department realized that this was an incredible opportunity. Those non-cosmonaut researchers could be from anywhere, and this was a massive propaganda opportunity if they launched foreign researchers into space for those short trips. And, like, as cynical as I can sometimes be about it, I do want to make clear that Interkosmos was probably the most successful in history space cooperative, like, international space cooperation.
Like, it absolutely worked, but...
I mean, the ISS probably more successful in the long run, but the fact that, like, again, 15 countries got their people in orbit because of Interkosmos, while at the same time recognizing that it was only started for a practical reason, and they just kind of slapped some propaganda, socialist brotherhood kind of stuff on top of that.
Yeah, they just put the appropriate shine on it.
Yeah. And at the same time, if I was from a country that did not have the ability to launch people into orbit, and someone asked, hey, do you want to do a 2-day trip? You're basically just going to be a glorified truck driver. I'd still say yes.
Yeah, by all means. It's a pretty decent friggin' deal.
Oh,
What
yeah.
if you were a cosmonaut, but the only parts that you actually enjoyed about it was the launch, and that was it?
Oh, that would actually work great then. Yeah, you're getting the best possible deal. You're the guy who's volunteering over and over. Like, no, I'll go. I'll take it. Don't worry.
I'll drive the car back.
I really like the way the rocket vibrates my bones.
I like getting into the bone vibrator.
Dude, yeah, you do them often enough. There's enough stations up there that like every weekend you just spend, or you could make it work where you spend your 5 days in space and then you have the weekend off and then you're back up to space on Monday.
Imagine just doing multiple launches a day. Imagine you do a launch and then it's like, all right, we dropped off. We're going back now. And then you literally are like flown right back to do a second launch.
Some kind of scenario where like the cosmonaut only has partial custody of his kids, so he like has to be back on every other weekend. Now, in 1978, Czechoslovak cosmonaut Vladimir Remek became the first person in orbit not from the US or USSR. He flew on Soyuz 28 and spent about a week on the Salyut 6 station, visiting the resident crew of Soyuz 26. Like most Interkosmos cosmonauts, Remek was a qualified military pilot who had been put through a crash course space training. Also, like most Interkosmos members to follow, he was a guest, given the formal title of research cosmonaut, which is basically the equivalent, like, this got me onto a long jag of looking up astronaut ranks and roles. This is kind of the equivalent of spaceflight participant for modern astronauts, which is a fancy way of saying, is present on the spacecraft, don't touch anything. There have always been roles within missions where it's just like, this person is here, please don't touch anything, you can hang out. The kind of message being that Interkosmos cosmonauts, although they were trained, they were not actually expected to do much in their week or so in orbit. So over the next 3 years, 8 more Interkosmos cosmonauts from all across the world would fly to Salyut 6, ending with Romania and Dumitru Prunariu, who I want to focus on today. Also, to be fair, Interkosmos did continue after this. They basically did like a round of all of the socialist countries, all of the Warsaw Pact countries, and then Vietnam, Cuba, Mongolia, and then Romania. Basically, all the socialist countries got to fly first, and they flew to Salyut 6, and then later missions were done flying to Salyut 7, and that's where you got, like India, France, Syria. And there was also a story I did really like about Vladimir Remek was whenever he came down, someone on the medical staff noticed that like his hands were red. And I don't think it was actually because of this, but the joke just became like the joke he always told with the cosmonauts was like, whenever I was up there, anytime I tried to touch anything, one of them would just slap me.
It's actually really
don't
good.
Touch that.
Yeah, exactly. Like, Vlad, no.
They're just hitting him with the, They're hitting him with the stick they just use to actuate all the buttons. Just blasting it across his knuckles like a Catholic school teacher.
Yeah, the Soyuz poker stick, it's just used if Vladimir is a little too far away from you.
Very multifunctional.
We also do need to make an episode sometime talking about like the different roles that people are allowed to have as astronauts. For example, like if you're on a US mission and you're not a US citizen, good luck having any role other than payload specialist fucko, which is also just kind of like, all right, we have entrusted you with one little bit of science. Don't touch anything.
You fuck up that science, we're going to get you.
Yeah, international space cooperation always has limits like that.
Dumitru Prunariu.
Now, Dumitru Dorin Prunariu was born in 1952 in the Transylvanian city of Brasov, which is pretty much right in the middle of Romania. His father was an auto engineer and his mother was a teacher, and they both encouraged him greatly as he grew up with an interest in engineering and science. Like a lot of space figures we've talked about, he also had an early obsession with aviation and rocketry. In elementary school, he spent his free time building and flying model airplanes at the local Pioneer Club. When he hit high school, he graduated to model rockets and joined the Cosmos Messengers Club. He even won a bronze medal in a national student competition for designing a model rocket launch site, sort of like a model Baikonur. Although in fairness, he also got gold for a Classroom of the Year diorama he made. Side note, his first name is Dumitru, but most people knew him as Doran, so that's mostly what I'm going to be using today. Also because this story has another prominent Dumitru guy, so separating them will just make this easier. In 1971, he went to the Bucharest Polytechnic Institute to study aerospace engineering, graduating after 5 years with what we would call a master's degree. He also spent his free time in those years joining up with a pilot's club and getting certified as a sport pilot. So far, this guy sounds like a prototypical story of every single cosmonaut, astronaut, or designer we've talked about. Someone who knew what they wanted to do from a young age and devoted their entire professional lives to achieving it. Someone who spent like all their free time building planes, building rockets, flying planes, all of that. But that's not actually Doran. At this point in his life, he didn't think about going to space as a serious idea, both because Romania didn't have any cosmonauts, and because his professional path had always been to become an aerospace engineer. His hometown of Brasov was home to Romania's main aircraft producer, Industria Aeronautica Romana, or IAR. These are also the people who made a bunch of planes during World War II. Post-World War II, they made tractors, and by this time, they had been allowed to go back into making aircraft for the Romanian Air Force. They made helicopters a lot. So all of this just being in his hometown, it made sense to him to just go work for them after graduating.
This definitely was like the gene seed for this.
Yeah, and to me, it kind of like, we always talk about those 110% Class A kind of people who just devote every moment and then they become astronauts. To me, this speaks so much more to me because this is the pragmatism of a junior engineer coming out of school. This is someone who's like, I can chase the stars, but I also live here and there's a bit of industry here, so I may as well. He happens to live in his country's hub for aerospace engineering, and he's going to take it.
He's got a shot.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, he winds up at the factory. But that plan did change in 1977. After a year of working at the factory, Doran started his mandatory 6-month military service. Because he was university educated and already an engineer in training, he was assigned to the Reserve Aviation Officers School. And where most countries selected their space travelers from experienced test or fighter pilots, when Romania's turn for the Interkosmos program came up, they offered Doran and his class of still-in-training officer candidates the chance instead. And the best part is that no one wanted to join.
No, just let me work on my friggin' planes.
I'm not good enough for this, please.
Imposter syndrome brackets can't go to space. Quote, I was reluctant to the proposal of the commander to take part in the selection of candidates for the cosmonaut program because I thought my professional future was already defined. Buddy is just like, no, I'm a junior engineer at Bombardier Aerospace. Why the fuck would I want to go to space? Have you seen this tractor I'm working on? Also, just the fact that, yeah, like when it was Romania's turn, they weren't looking at their pilots. They were just like, all right, well, we got some like, oh, those guys look good. Those guys I saw at that officer training school, they have not yet finished their training to be military officers, and they're fucking conscripts.
You know, at some point, he must have shot awake in the middle of the night and said, I don't want to go up there. He's going to hit my hand until it bleeds.
Oh yeah, just like seeing the pictures of Vladimir Remek come down, he does like the big wave to the crowd, and his hand is just like massive red and swollen. His hand looks like the king's.
Oh god. No, just a cosmonaut coming out of the pod after it's landed, all you see is just the stick first.
Although this is the closest we have ever come in history to what we've joked about of being conscripted to go to space. Because these guys, their qualification was junior engineer, got conscripted into the Air Force. Done. So on top of having his career already picked out, Doran was married and had a kid by this point. He wanted to stay in his hometown, he wanted to keep working at the aircraft factory, and he wanted to be with his family. Not to mention, he thought this was going to be some like huge national selection process where he'd be up against like hundreds of Romania's best pilots and engineers, and he thought that like, you know, he would inevitably wash out and it would just be a huge waste of time for no gain. I can absolutely understand that. If I was told, hey, you have an opportunity to join, I don't know, like the CSA astronaut selection, but it has to be right now and it's going to eat up like 2 years of your life, I'd probably say no just because I know I'm not going to win.
Thank you for the opportunity, but no.
Exactly, I have other things to do. The thing that changed Doran's mind, though, rules. Quote, we were pretty skeptical, but the commander said, okay, whoever wants to take part in the selection will be taken to Bucharest by a military airplane. I liked to fly very much, so I said, that's an interesting idea. Secondly, he said, you will undergo a full medical checkup, for free, in the military hospital. The military hospital was very well known, a very professional hospital in that time, and we said, why not? Maybe at this age we have to think about our health.
They got his ass with the plane.
Yeah,
They're just like, yo, do you want to ride in like a rickety DC-3? Hell yeah.
I never get to fly anywhere.
This dude was offered the chance to go to space and turned it down. What changed his mind was a free plane trip and a doctor's appointment.
Hey, don't you dare shit on that.
I was going to say, this is a very American kind of...
It was all part of his plan. You just had to sweeten the deal a little bit.
Hey man, do you want to be a cosmonaut and represent your country in space? Cross his arms? I don't know. What's in it for me? We will send you on a plane and we'll have a doctor take your blood, I guess. Deal.
I don't know. This plane, it's got an empty seat on it.
I don't know. I heard that Yuri Gagarin guy died up there. So he and the other candidates were flown out to Bucharest and immediately put through a grueling round of medical, mental, and fitness tests overseen by Soviet Space Agency doctors. And every single candidate failed, Doran included.
Damn, bro. It's like they weren't ready.
It just means that, like, medically speaking, no one in Romania is qualified to go to space. And the way Doran describes it, since he'd been conscripted, he had been eating much better food and had just gotten fat. So combined with him having a bit of a cold during the selection, and it was enough to remove him from consideration. So again, just like, these are the best of the best. Like, that kid's like 19. That guy's fat. Why is he here? That guy's still on the plane. What the fuck?
Yeah, he wanted another ride.
Oh, that reminds me. Another thing that Doran describes is that of the crop of people who have been sent, a couple of them puke on the plane, and that is enough for them to just go like, well, I guess I'm not cosmonaut material. Fair enough. If you get air sick, you probably don't want to experience space sickness.
They sent us up this high. What's it going to be like when we go higher? No.
Oh, I don't think I like this anymore. Credit to people who know their limits, though. Now, just as he had suspected, he didn't get the job, and this was a big waste of time. Still, he got a plane ride and a free doctor's appointment, so Doran went back to his job at the factory happy, and he basically put the whole experience behind him.
And that, listener, is the story.
Yeah, exactly. The first Romanian to come vaguely near space. Oh, just showing back up at the factory like, hey man, how'd it go? And he just like pulls out the little doctor's appointment lollipop from his mouth. He like moves his hand and reveals that he's got 2 lollipops.
Yeah, not only did I get to fly and get a free doctor's visit, but they also had to fly me back, so I got the ride twice.
Oh, that would totally be the kind of thing that like the Romanian Air Force would just like caveat that. Like, we didn't say we were going to fly you back. Here's a bus. Oh, dude, what the doctor said. He said I was fat and I had a cold.
You're fat and get on the fucking bus.
So apparently the Romanian government was not happy with the Interkosmos program telling them like, yeah, no, all of your dudes failed. So 4 months later, he goes back to the factory. He works for 4 months. He is called back for a second try, which he passed. And holy fuck, do I wish astronaut selection worked like this. I wish a fat guy could just be offered the chance to go fresh out of school, fail, and then a couple of months later just like go back and find that the standards have been relaxed a lot.
Hey, I realize absolutely nothing has changed since you failed 4 months ago, but we want to give you a shot. We want you to try again.
Like the cut of your jib.
He just walks into the room. And they're like, all right, you passed.
Oh, but yeah, you've got the morale test down pat. Nice. Good hair, good smile, done.
All of the qualities that make a good cosmonaut. Good hair and a good smile. That's all you need.
Just like having fat Doran step on a scale and they're just reading it off and like whatever it ends up at, they're just like, oh my god, look at that. That's like exactly 1 pound below the limit. Wow.
You know, if you can maintain eye contact and give the universe a firm handshake, you can do anything you want.
All right, son, this is Alexei Leonov. Let's see how your handshake does. Commander Leonov, the choice is up to you.
Holy fuck, this kid's good.
So, by September 1977, Romania had 7 competing cosmonaut candidates, and these guys were split into like 3 different categories. Active duty military, civilian engineers doing their mandatory service, so that's where Doran is, and just straight up civilian aerospace engineers. As medical exams gave way to training and tests, 2 candidates washed out and 2 quit, leaving just Doran, a civilian engineer named Christian Guran, and captain engineer Dumitru Prunariu, hence why I'm calling Doran Doran. Captain engineer. We'll talk about that in a bit, but that is actually one interesting thing about Interkosmos, is that each country was kind of allowed to pick what they wanted to focus on.
Oh.
So Romania said instead of picking fighter pilots, Romania explicitly wanted to send engineers, people who had aerospace engineer experience, because they kind of figured, like, you're not going to fly the thing. You're a research cosmonaut. Maybe we should send someone who can do some research. While every other Interkosmos country was like, we sent our top ace, and then he sat in the corner for 8 days and came home crying. Mission accomplished. Vladimir Remek was never able to fly again after they had to amputate both hands to get him out of the Soyuz. They're still in there.
Operate the buckles.
There's a very dark joke that I'm not going to make about him potentially being able to save Soyuz 11 because his fingers would be able to stop the leak.
Just reach up and put a finger.
I'm going back to my favorite bits of monkey space training and then the device that delivers shocks as punishment. And it's like, instead he has to go into space to do science, and his positive reward, or sorry, his negative reward is he receives slaps to the hand.
Yeah,
right?
We have launched an elderly Russian teacher. This elderly woman, she has a ruler, and she is going to float behind you, providing negative reinforcement when you fuck up.
And the positive reinforcement, when the tests are conducted correctly, he gets to take a little sip out of like a giant like hamster water bottle of smuggled Armenian cognac.
He still has to mutter the jingle.
Now, even though the Interkosmos program laid out that only 2 cosmonauts could be picked, so one who would fly and one who would be the backup, Romania kind of decided to say fuck that, and all 3 were sent to Moscow for a final exam. And they were also sent for a crash course in Russian, though this didn't really work out. Quote, the proficiency they achieved hardly allowed them to express themselves in elementary Russian and to understand the basic ideas of what was spoken. So, like, for the Soviets, their whole thing is, you can send 2 people, and they absolutely have to be able to speak Russian. Romania sends 3 people, none of them know a word of Russian. Hell yeah. Which I have to imagine was a bit of a fuck you. Because these two countries, these 2 agencies do not get along. In that last exam, the civilian engineer, Christian Guran, he was not annihilated. Fuck, he was eliminated for ear problems. I'm keeping that in. Yeah.
Reduced to atoms. He got stuffed into the particle collider and turned into data.
You have to be the guy who puts the lighter, like the fucking spark stick, into the bottom of the Soyuz. Congratulations. We want to do Interkosmos for the ground crew as well. And also the fact that he was eliminated for ear problems, which I need to be clear, that's not hearing problems.
He could be suffering from very extreme cases of vertigo. I mean, it's the ear.
I'm joking around, but it was a problem with his like vestibular system, like balance and whatnot, that if going into space probably would have fucked him over.
His ear snails are just a little too weird.
Yeah. He was in the high school boxing team, and now he's got cauliflower ear, and like they don't want to have to redesign the helmet for him. Oh fuck, like making a spacesuit helmet that just looks like those German GSG-9 helmets with like the big ear muffs just to fit Guran's massive ears. I don't know why it is, I'm just picturing every Interkosmos candidate having some like massively overgrown part of their body, like Vladimir Remek's hands.
Just imagine just his helmet, except it's just bulged out at the side. That's all it is.
The plastic is cracking slightly.
Like, you just change the aspect ratio to 110% horizontal.
So, Guran gets eliminated, and this clears the way for Dediu and Doran to move to the cosmonaut training facility at Star City and begin their Interkosmos training full-time. For what it's worth, Guran was able to translate his time in the selection process into a very successful career with the Romanian Air Force, which also does tend to happen with candidates even if they don't make it. It's this kind of situation where like even making it in is very prestigious. So if you lose, it's still something you can put in your CV. You can say like, I came 3rd in cosmonaut selection, hire me. I also want to take a second to talk about Romania's cosmonaut selection and what made them stand out from the other Interkosmos nations. Like I said, they kind of mixed it up a little bit. While Captain Dediu was a military pilot, of the original 7 candidates, all of the rest were civilian engineers. Other Interkosmos nations who had gone before had almost exclusively picked military pilots. The reason for this was not the traditional reason that pilots make good astronauts, that they're, they have the right stuff, they're cool under fire, they're used to working together, and they know how to follow orders, but it was actually because of a requirement from the Soviets. Whoever they picked they had to know Russian. That was the only requirement of the Interkosmos program. Communication was the biggest issue. And the best way to guarantee that was to pick people who had studied in the Soviet Union, either at schools or in pilot training. So a lot of these Warsaw Pact countries, they send their pilots for like war games, for trainings, and these guys naturally pick up Russian that way. So whenever you want someone who's like cosmonaut qualified and knows Russian, it kind of just winds up being a fighter pilot.
Just because the operative language, military language being Russian, just
Of the
segues
Warsaw
nicely
Pact.
into segues nicely into, well, you're going to space now.
Yep, we know you already know it, but that was not the case for Romania. As Doran described it, quote, Romania was politically a little bit different from the other socialist countries. Starting with 1964, we stopped sending people to any military institutions in Russia. So at that time, we didn't have anyone speaking Russian and having graduated from Russian military or civilian institutions, so we had to learn Russian. The second issue was that Romania imposed on the candidates the requirements to be engineers, to have a technical higher education degree, to be able to work with the advanced level of space technology. So while other Interkosmos countries were kind of content to say, like, all right, we're going to send this guy who we know can work with the Soviets and he can speak Russian, Romania was like, hey, if we're sending a guy into space, he should probably know how spacecraft work. We should probably pick someone who has like a technical background, which is also why Dumitru Prunariu, who is a fighter pilot, he is also captain engineer. His main shtick is that he is an aerospace engineer who happens to be in the Army or the Air Force.
No, you can only send up your right stuff monkey men who don't know anything about technology, but man, do they got guts.
If they knew anything about technology, they would probably want to push buttons. We need to keep them stupid.
All right, sweetie, we designed this machine specifically so that if you see the little blue light come on, you have to push that button, okay?
Okay. All right, good job, Major. Good job.
What do the brain boys say back home? The lights are orange.
Damn it.
Pulls out the manual and attempts to diagnose the problem and realizes he can't read.
Now, Doran and Dediu landed in Moscow in March of 1978, and they started their cosmonaut training at Star City. After a few weeks, they stopped, because it became apparent that neither of them spoke any Russian, and their inability to communicate would severely fuck up any mission they were assigned to. So, like, the little crash course they got, even that didn't stick. And forget space training, we're sending you guys to, like, literacy school.
Elementary Russian.
Yeah. It's just like them in their full cosmonaut suits sitting in on like a kindergarten class. So both men were enrolled in the Patrice Lumumba University, which is a school in Moscow for teaching Russian to foreign students from socialist countries. It still exists now today, except it's like Patrice Lumumba University of Russian Friendship. The next year and a half was spent developing their Russian language skills, which Doran said worked well enough that he basically sounded like a natural Russian speaker, but it also gave his Romanian a very noticeable Russian accent, and this will come into play later.
So he had to sacrifice his Romanian accent to go to space.
Yeah, this man's head can only contain one accent at a time.
This man has given up everything in order to go to space.
Yes.
Unwillingly. It reminds me of the time my dad had a mustache for most of my growing up as like a little kid, and then after the divorce he started shaving his mustache off, and so like
correlation causation.
Yeah, so like I don't know, like a 7-year-old who sees his dad for the first time without a mustache, you're like, who are you? You're not my dad. Even though I knew it was my dad, like yeah. I'm like, but you're not my dad. You're a faker. You're not real. This is wrong. Like something is intrinsically wrong with the universe. Yeah, like
something has been lost.
Something has been lost, and it can't come back. And
put it back.
And it won't come back. And it's just like Doran's accent being ruined by having learned Russian as a second language.
Now, with their communication skills up to par, Dediu and Doran were allowed to return to proper cosmonaut training. Because only one of them would fly and the other would become the backup, they were split up and assigned a Soviet cosmonaut to help train them and to eventually be their crewmate on a space mission. Captain Engineer Dediu, he was assigned Yuri Romanenko, and Doran got veteran cosmonaut Yevgeny Krunov. So right off the bat, this might sound good, but it's actually like Doran at a huge disadvantage. Romanenko had recent flight experience. He's been to Salyut 6 twice, and he even has Interkosmos experience because he flew with Cuban cosmonaut Arnaldo Tamayo Mendez. Doran's partner Krunov, meanwhile, has been to space only once, and that one time was 11 years ago. Also, they hate each other.
Completely different system, completely different rocket.
Yeah.
Krunov gets to rest on his laurels.
To give you some context here, Krunov flew on Soyuz 4, and they are now competing over who is going to go on Soyuz 40. Also, just the fact that, Doran is very clear that they both hated each other the whole time. Thankfully, Doran does not have to deal with Krunov for long. He got a new partner when Krunov suddenly resigned from the Cosmonaut Corps early in their training. And it's not entirely clear why. There are rumors floating around of violations of regulations, and Doran, who does know, he simply said, quote, some trouble with his wife.
Oh. He had too many. He had a few too many at the insertion, and now he's in the doghouse.
I think it was something where, he cheated on his wife, something like that, and whenever those things come up, the Soviet Space Agency is very much, kind of like Grigory Nalyubov, they do have, standards and professionalism, and if you break that, fuck you, you're out. Or you will, by this point, you're not going to be disappeared, but you will be very politely told to resign now.
Just holding the door open.
Exactly. Yeah.
Go.
Krunov was replaced by cosmonaut Leonid Popov, who had literally just come back from a mission to Salyut 6 a couple of months before. Doran also got a new trainer named Nicolae Chuklov, and apparently all of this just clicked. Where Doran and Krunov didn't get along, he, Popov, and Chuklov formed an unbreakable cosmonaut dream team. Quote, together we were trying to define creative, innovative solutions in my training, which was increasingly appreciated. Nicolae had graduated from an aviation institute with the best results, and he had become a trainer of cosmonauts. He was a bit younger than me, and I was his first student. We spoke the same language of engineering, so we were a very good team, teacher and student. So, in both cases, with his language and with his cosmonaut training, he gets assigned someone who's all right, we're going to throw out the book, we're going to try something new. And with Nicolae Chuklov, his cosmonaut instructor, this guy, he completely revamps how they're going to go about their training, and it also just works really well because both he and Chuklov are experienced aerospace engineers. They click. They can talk to each other. So when Popov and Prunariu went through their final exams for the spaceflight, they got the best score ever achieved by a crew at Star City. I don't know if this still holds true, but it was true for the more than 30 years by that point of, people training at Star City.
God, I hope so.
An impossibly high score for duos.
Yeah.
Their minds, bodies, and souls were so in sync, they're impossible to defeat.
Sitting in the Soyuz and then the Pacific Rim drift thing happens.
Oh, God.
Basically, over the course of a few months, Dumitru Prunariu went from the underdog to basically guaranteed to fly. While the decision was pretty much made behind closed doors, it would not be revealed publicly or even confirmed to the cosmonauts until 2 days before launch. This was not unusual for the Soviet space program. Overall, they preferred to just not announce missions at all if they have the choice. Publicly confirming prime and backup crews, if you said, this guy's going to fly first and then this guy is his backup, that can lead to embarrassment. Say if Yevgeny Krunov gets replaced, people might wonder, hey, where's that guy who was supposed to be on the mission? But this also left everyone in Romania in the dark about who would be the first to represent their country in orbit. So, on May 11th, 1981, just before the launch of the Soyuz 40 mission, there was a big press conference at Baikonur Cosmodrome. There, it was announced that Dumitru Prunariu would be the first Romanian in space, and Captain Engineer Dumitru Dediu would be his backup. And if you thought that day could not get any worse for Dediu, it was also his birthday. Oh no, sweetie. I'm just picturing them sitting at the press conference and they all have party hats on.
He's just off in the corner frowning.
Dude, it's your fucking birthday and you get told that you're not going to space. Also, there's only 2 days to the launch, so if you're gonna try and kill the Prime guy so that you can take his place, you don't have a lot of time.
What's he gonna do, just walk to his house with a Makarov?
That is not a lot of time to figure out Dumitru Prunariu's patrol paths, if he stands under chandeliers, anything like that, There's probably not even a lot of chandelier. There's just a chandelier in the middle of the Baikonur desert.
Well, just holding a gun to his head, cheat on your wife now.
I do just love that though. Like, of all, I mean, statistically, 1 in 365. But fuck, is that like the worst day to get that news?
The Soyuz 40 mission.
So, the rocket lifted off without incident on May 14th for an 8-day mission. Remember that for all of the hoopla of international cooperation and the Soviet Union opening the cosmos to socialist allies, the whole point of an Interkosmos mission was basically to ferry a new Soyuz up and then take an old one down. But Interkosmos missions gave more benefits than just propaganda. There was a bit of a transactional scientific thing going on. While a Romanian or Polish or Bulgarian cosmonaut was on the station, that country would get to direct the scientific work of every cosmonaut, including the 3 Soviets on board. Because the foreign cosmonaut was probably going to be a fighter pilot or an engineer, and it'd definitely be their first flight, the resident Soviet cosmonauts on the Salyut were arguably a bigger draw. Like, if you timed or negotiated your Interkosmos mission right, you might not just be dealing with, fighter pilots. You could have the services of a space botanist or a welding expert, or anyone who might have more experience than your dude and his 1 year of training. So basically, if that makes sense, like, some of the value of the Cosmos, the Interkosmos mission, wasn't your dude who was being launched, because your dude would inevitably be the least experienced person up there. You also got the services of, like, all of these experienced cosmonauts who have potentially some, like, really interesting specializations. So, like, some of the real value, at least to a lot of these governments, is the science they can do. Which would kind of be fun. Like, you're up there for a week, you ask your government, like, hey, is there anything I can do to help out? Nope. We're just going to work with these Soviet guys for a little bit. Now, Soyuz 40 docked with Salyut 6 on the second day of their mission, and Popov and Prunariu joined the resident crew of Vladimir Kovalyonok and Viktor Savinek. Definitely mispronouncing those. The mission itself was uneventful. After some rest, the crews started working on the experiments requested by the Romanian scientific institutions. Quote, the topics included astrophysical experiments, study of the radiation environment, biomedical experiments, psychological tests, and technological experiments. In fact, all 4 crew members would assist in completing a total of 22 scientific experiments for this phase of the Interkosmos program. So that's the work. But what I really want to zoom in on is the smuggling.
I love smuggling.
We're here. We're home.
We should do a tallied up episode for like every crime ever committed in space.
Oh, yeah. That'd be fun. Now, space smuggling is not new or even uncommon. There are any number of reasons why it happens. So, like, personal effects an astronaut can take with them are incredibly limited. Space food historically sucks. And astronauts and cosmonauts, especially the earlier ones, they always enjoyed pranks and they often enjoyed skirting the rules when they could get away with it. Space travelers are as good at coming up with new smuggling routes as space programs are at shutting them down. It's something of like a mini arms race, and not one that either side is willing to go into detail on. Which is why this story is great. It's a complete accounting of exactly how space smuggling worked in a well-established space program. So this is like 1981. The Soviets, like the space program, is aware of smuggling and they're trying to clamp down on it. This is compared to something like Gemini 3, the corned beef sandwich, was the first space smuggling, and, they just kind of like shoved it in their suit. The complexity of space smuggling has gone up ridiculously as programs have become aware of it.
As a quick aside to that, just the absolute crumb hurricane that occurred.
Oh god, no, we will be talking about Gemini 3 in detail. Yeah, just living in a snow globe of, like, corned beef and bread.
How much bread do you have in your lungs on re-entry interface?
Quote, despite the fact that they signed a document stating that they wouldn't fly alcohol or a camera, Prunariu and Popov carried aboard Soyuz 40 a small automatic Canon camera with a 38mm lens that French candidate Patrick Baudry had purchased for Popov for around $100. And they're going to get this thing into orbit. When he and Popov were given the camera during training, they apparently came up with all kinds of schemes about how they were going to smuggle it. Maybe they could take it apart and sneak it up hidden in their spacesuits, or even pay some technicians to hide it in the Soyuz's cargo. Which I also just love, like, the side-to-side comparison. Like, we talked recently about the Pioneer plaque and how, like, the addition of the plaque, like a couple of grams here or there, everything has to stop. We're going to have to reanalyze we have to find its CG now, versus every single Soyuz flying up with like 100 kilos of unaccounted for just alcohol and cameras.
But that's the thing, the brandy was always in the same stash location. Therefore, it was a known quantity.
I love the idea of them like flying up, and every single time they fly up, they won't go unless they have every single last one of their luxury goods.
Yep.
That's the secret, Cap. They use the brandy to fix the CG.
And so it inevitably ends up that they're carrying up more luxury goods than they are like mission critical equipment.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Drink more from Flank Bottle 8.
And a lot of those like scientific experiments, you crack open the case, what's inside? More alcohol.
An onion and a beer.
The experiment is, how long can we keep the space party going?
So these guys, they're thinking up all kinds of schemes. How are they going to get this camera up there? And what wound up happening was that they got a package from Valentin Glushko, Korolev's old rival, who by this time was the head of the semi-centralized Soviet space program. So basically, after the failure of Vasily Mission, the Soviet government somewhat they never wound up at NASA levels, but it wasn't the OKB fest of like the early 60s and 70s. But yeah, they get a package from Glushko, and specifically, they got a package from Glushko wrapped in paper, tied with a ribbon, and marked with a big "cleared for flight" sign. Now, can anyone guess why this might be important?
Because no one's going to question it. It's already been cleared for flight.
There were no contents listed, no mass, no volume, no nothing.
But it's cleared.
What Glushko actually wanted launched was a set of documents that like Prunariu was going to sign in orbit. It was basically a receipt. You know, it would be like, hey, I am in space, check, and we're working on the experiments, check. It was some like documentation and like ceremonial stuff. But in doing so, he had given the cosmonauts a package that they could put anything inside of, and it would be launched without a search, no questions asked. After all, the package says cleared for flight, so it must have already been inspected and cleared, and if you ask questions, you're probably gonna get fired.
Glushko fucking giving them a blank check, dude.
Just asking them to drink in orbit.
So they painstakingly, and I do appreciate how like painstaking they are about this, they take it apart bit by bit. They didn't cut the ribbon, they untie the knots, they made sure not to tear the paper. And they reassembled it as a big cardboard box.
Oh my god.
Whenever they got it, it was a manila envelope with some paper and string tied around it. They turn it into a cardboard box, and they hide the camera, a bunch of rolls of Kodak film, and a bottle of Romanian brandy, because of course.
What are you gonna do, question the box?
Hey, it worked. They resealed it, it had the big cleared for flight, and, you know, it was cleared for flight, so no one asked questions.
God, they went about this with absolutely immaculate aplomb.
Yes. Yeah.
Smuggling, aced.
There were more complicated ways of actually sneaking stuff on board, but yeah, just like the luck of having Valentin Glushko just like have a sticker with "this got signed by Valentin Glushko, launch it into space," and just giving it to a cosmonaut and trusting that everything will go well.
Hint, don't trust the astronauts.
Oh, dude, that would be the best way to make money. Like, there has to have been a black market for Glushko signatures, you know? Like, if you could cut his signature out of a little letter and, like, paste it onto a sticker and then put that sticker on, I don't know, a crate of vodka, awesome, nice, money well spent.
You are God at that point.
Yeah, just fully filling a Progress spacecraft, like, having to bring the N1 back in order to launch the pallet, the huge pile of alcohol that needs to get to Salyut 6 right the fuck now.
The huge cleared for flight pallet of liquor.
So this makes it up into orbit, and the camera doesn't cause a problem. It gets smuggled to space perfectly. It did, however, become a problem when they landed. See, the Salyut station had 3 official cameras listed on board: a 24mm Praktica, a 50mm Praktica, and an 80mm Hasselblad. I'm not a camera guy. I don't know what any of that means.
Hasselblads are some top-notch stuff.
Okay, all right. So we got a camera guy. I was just going to say, yeah, like if I know camera guys, someone just creamed their jeans right now hearing those words. Good for you, I guess.
Thanks.
But when the crew of Soyuz 40 returned to Earth and they tried to get all of their fancy Kodak film developed, the lab techs, these guys were camera guys, and they immediately realized, like, what the fuck, this isn't our camera. The way Popov describes this, they're able to just look at a camera. Like they have developed so many pictures inside of Salyut stations that they know exactly what a certain camera should be able to see. And this camera, this is a new camera. They immediately visually identify this as pictures from a camera they have never seen before. According to Popov, they were mad, but not too mad. Like they basically said, hey, fess up. Do you have a camera up there? And if the cosmonauts didn't fess up, they would pass it up the chain to Star City, they would report the smuggling, and both men would be punished. But if Popov and Doran just admitted what the camera was, the lab techs wouldn't say anything, and then they would also publish the photos, because, like, the lab techs were, hey, we're not even mad. These photos are better than our cameras. We're just going to use this one now.
What, just immediately putting in a purchase rec for the camera that
Honestly, yeah. Sorry, like a Kodak? Okay, cool. I'll grab one of those.
It's a situation where they're like softly strong-arming them into like letting them in on it too, basically. Yeah. Like,
yeah,
if you're gonna cheat, can we cheat with you? You know, like
hey, we've got an in, and it's all. You are right about the strong-arming, because if you don't let us in, we're gonna burn this whole thing down. And that is also a proud tradition of the Soviet Space Agency, because as we talked about back during the first moon race episodes, the first pictures of the dark side of the moon were taken with stolen CIA film. These guys in the camera department, if they can get better film somewhere, they're gonna do it.
They got the Connect?
Yeah. We got spy balloons. They come down every afternoon, right in my backyard, like clockwork.
Yeah, the CIA just sends me a care package every once in a while.
And in this case, the cosmonauts, they fess up, they just say what the camera is, and then Soviet propaganda publishes these photos that are better than any official camera on the Salyut station.
That the like political propaganda guys are like too stupid to know the difference about. Like, well, they're hired. They were hired to be like the propaganda minister, not the guy who understands how a camera works.
Come on, these photos came to us in a paper package that was marked clear for publishing. What are you gonna do? You're gonna like, it's been cleared. It says right there. So yeah, the rest of the mission was uneventful. Doran helped with the experiments, he worked with the other cosmonauts, and took pictures with his smuggled Kodak. He also reported, not to any officials, being shocked to see how lit up the US and Western Europe was at night, while Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union was mostly dark. So this is your classic kind of like South Korea, North Korea from orbit kind of picture. In an interview with the Soviet Weekly, though, he gave some more politically convenient observations. Quote, in orbit, one gets a very clear view. For example, at one glance, you can see a huge area extending from the Nile to the Caspian, and you can see everything exceptionally well, even better than on a map. Mountains, faults, and ring structures. It is easy to get one's bearings and identify what territory you are over at that moment. Unfortunately, Europe was heavily overcast, and we passed over Romania in the evening. Only on the final days of the flight did it come out of the shadow, enabling me to see the Danube and the Carpathians. On the 22nd of May, 1981, after 7 days and 20 hours in orbit, Soyuz 40 deorbited and landed in what is now Kazakhstan. This also marked the start of Dumitru Prunariu's fall from grace.
Aftermath and censorship.
We've been building up to this.
It's a fun one. I'm happy with how this ends. The return of an Interkosmos cosmonaut was normally greeted with fanfare in their home country. Normal people celebrated the first of their countrymen to explore space, while politicians and diplomats threw big conferences about how this cooperation would continue into the future and further socialist exploration of the cosmos. That kind of happened for Doran. About a week after the landing, he had a meeting with General Secretary of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, or Leonid Brezhnev, as we know him, where he was awarded the title of Hero of the Soviet Union, the Order of Lenin, and the Gold Star Medal.
Ooh, a quick triple. Gotta like it.
Which is a lot. Yeah, that is a lot of shit to be handed after like a week in orbit. A lot of that would have been political, like, you know, the guys from a foreign country, you give him that to make him look good. It's a nice thing for the country he is from. If you go into space as a cosmonaut, as a Soviet cosmonaut, you're sure as shit not getting Hero of the Soviet Union for a 1-week trip. Fuck you. But Doran's reception back in Romania was comparatively cold for a couple of reasons.
Well, I was going to say, he committed the cardinal sin. He got a medal that people did not there. Specifically one, Elena Ceausescu.
Not just Elena.
Oh, Nicolae was also pissed?
Nicolae didn't have half of those awards, so of course he's going to be fucking pissed.
Man, if only Nicolae had a brain in his head, because then he could just, instead of getting the medals, he could just have the guy. You could just have all the medals and the guy. You just make him your guy.
Exactly. That's the weirdest thing. The weirdest thing through all of this is that Ceausescu didn't try and make Prunariu an asset, because it's like, oh, I didn't get this medal. You're the dictator. You own him. You can make him stand behind you. You can make him dance. Not saying he should have. Now, the first reason I do kind of agree with, and you need to understand that Romania was kind of the most disloyal member of the Warsaw Pact. A lot of this just came down to being one of the few socialist states to actually call the Soviets out on their bullshit, like when they denounced the Warsaw Pact's 1968 invasion of Czechoslovakia. In return, the Soviets punished Romania by offering them the least support of all Warsaw Pact countries, which was kind of fine with Romania because they saw extensive Soviet support, like military support and whatnot, as soft power plays, which, it kind of was. And exactly the same thing happening in NATO with the US, like military aid, a lot of like diplomatic aid, stuff like that, also kind of, it can be used as a cudgel to keep allied countries in line. There is also the suspicion among historians that Romania getting the last Interkosmos spot for Salyut 6 was another snub. Like, for example, Vietnam, Cuba, and Mongolia all flew before Romania. Quote, if the rationale was indeed political, then Romania receiving the final Interkosmos mission was probably a direct result of Moscow's disapproval of Romanian behavior in that country's refusal to participate in the 1968 invasion of Czechoslovakia. And these relations had only gotten more strained while Doran was in training in Star City, because in 1979 the Soviets invaded Afghanistan, and Romania was quick to disavow this. This was another invasion, a Soviet invasion of a socialist country, in which Romania was quick to say, like, this is fucked up, we are not part of this, we disavow. And this pisses off the Soviets. So Doran coming back at this time complicated things. Whether he wanted to or not, he had kind of become a walking example of Soviet power over Romania. We will definitely go into it further in the future, but the Interkosmos program and a lot of space cooperation programs always have this soft power display right under the surface. The Soviets or Americans are allowing their allies access to space. Romania has sent a man into orbit, and they could not have done it without the support of their gracious patrons, the Soviet Union. Also, the fact that Doran showing up covered in Soviet medals before he could get any Romanian ones was just some more salt on the wound. Like, whenever he talks to Brezhnev first, then he goes back to Romania, and he shows up at the airport, like, with his he's got the Order of Lenin, he's got the Hero of the Soviet Union, he's got his gold star, he is decked out like a Soviet general.
Swagged out.
It's the fact that they gave it to him first. The Soviets claimed him before the Romanian government could.
Yeah.
But more importantly, he received medals that the dictator wanted.
The other reason is more fun, I promise you. On top of all of the horrible things they did, Nicolae and Elena Ceausescu were both very eccentric people. Nicolae liked being the hero of Romania, and there was very little room in Romanian propaganda for another. Even worse, Doran now had a higher Soviet medal than him, because Nicolae never got the Hero of the Soviet Union.
Oh shit, you're right!
Yeah. As a leader busy maintaining a cult of personality, Ceausescu viewed Doran as a threat to his fame, and like we talked about, for some reason he never considered using him as an asset.
No, instead he immediately went to his medal guy and said, you gotta make me something bigger.
Cults of personality are so exhausting, dude.
He's just showing up with, like, a meter across medal on his chest.
He's just looking like some of those North Korean generals that just have the medals attached to their pants going down.
It's a Captain Romania shield, except he wears it over his heart.
That would have saved him later in life.
This is how you coup-proof a socialist country, goddammit.
What are you gonna do, hit my medals?
So, even worse was Nicolae's wife, Elena Ceausescu. Her deal is that she liked to LARP as an award-winning chemist, despite having literally no scientific training or qualifications. Basically, it turns out that when you are the wife of a dictator, you don't need any of that. You can just force scientists to put your name on top of their papers. And if someone is trying to patent something new or exciting in Romania, you know that it had better have Elena Ceausescu listed as the inventor. on paper as in like papers that have her name on it, she is single-handedly responsible for most of Romania's scientific output. And like all over the world, you have these like, oh wow, look at this amazing research being done by Elena Ceausescu. And she just loved this. This was her favorite thing.
She just needed her treats.
Yeah. And whether or not people outside Romania actually believed this, they mostly played along for like diplomatic reasons, which let Elena play pretend at all kinds of international scientific expos and build up her collection of honorary doctorates from some of the best institutions in the world. She is like the plagiarist in chief. She mastered plagiarism in only a way that you can do whenever you control a country.
Her theoretical degree in physics, you know?
Dude, I was reading up on it. She had like 5 honorary doctorates that were just given to her as like diplomatic favors, or because people actually thought that like, wow, this is the smartest person in Romania. Look at how much she's writing. There's also a lot of great examples where like scientists try and talk to her and immediately it becomes clear she has no idea what like molecules are. Now, as with Nicolae, she saw Doran as a threat to take down, someone who had actual scientific experience, and she couldn't just take credit for this. She could not just go and say like, no, that was actually me on that space station. Just like going in the papers and like pasting her face over every single one of Doran's. I would also highly recommend going and finding the Behind the Bastards episode called Children of Dictators, because it has a great accounting of this and how Elena's jealousy even extended to her own kids. So like 2 out of 3 of the Ceausescu kids become actual like really good accredited scientists. I think one of them becomes a mathematician and the other one becomes like a legit nuclear physicist, and she fucking hates them because they are actually smart and she is not. So yeah, this is the dream team of jealous, envious lunatics with absolute dictatorial power that Doran has just kind of like thrown himself into. And it is amazing that he is still breathing at the end of all this.
Yeah, they tried to shoot him and the metal caught it.
When he landed back in Romania with a delegation of Soviet cosmonauts, Doran was ignored by the government, causing Alexei Leonov to turn to him on the tarmac and say,
Dumitru, your future looks bleak.
Hearing that from like the guy who at this point is the most senior cosmonaut, like still alive and working, it's just like, yo, dude, you're fucked.
Just lighting the cigarette. Sorry, I had to go like this.
I'm getting back on the plane. I will not be here when shit goes down.
Let me at least have a dart before I get shot.
Bro, your shit's just street fucked, bro. It's over.
Now, when he did eventually get to meet Ceausescu, he was worried about whether or not he should like wear his Soviet medals. So they still had the Soviet delegation, and like the back and forth was basically, you know, hey, if I don't wear them, the Soviets are going to get pissed. If I do wear them, Ceausescu might murder me on the spot.
Just furiously shoveling the medals into a pocket, just completely bare-chested. Hello!
Ceausescu was going to be awarding him the title of Hero of the Socialist Republic of Romania, and like we talked about, he would be walking up and pinning this medal on his chest while Doran was wearing the medal that Ceausescu did not have. He did not have a Hero of the Soviet Union. And he does, in the end, he like talks to the full-on Minister of National Defense, and the guy is like, I say wear 'em. Quote from Prunariu. Ceausescu was very sensitive to decorations, and he very much liked to be the first to receive awards without doing anything. Olteanu, who is the Minister of Defense here, he said, you must wear it because the Russian side could get offended if you don't. So I wore it. Ceausescu looked at me, looked at that award, and gave me the Romanian award. And they also describe how for the rest of the evening, Ceausescu just ignores him and like makes sure to be on the opposite side of the room from Doran at all times. Which I guess is a better response than murdering him, you know? Also at that exact same meeting, Elena later in the night gave a little speech where she talked about how easy it was to go to space and how, you know, if you really think about it, it's not nearly as big an achievement as chemistry.
Guys, you don't understand. I made the vinegar volcano in class today. That masterclass. You going to space? Easy.
She would totally extend that down to like high school science fairs. Like everybody at the high school science fair has an exhibit made by Elena Ceausescu. She's winning every single like kindergarten show and tell. She's winning every international award.
This is making me think of that. Wasn't there didn't Melania like take word for word a speech that Michelle Obama did? And just
possibly
did the speech?
I think I vaguely remember something like that, but I am not certain.
This is what this is making me think of.
It's one thing to plagiarize where like you think you're not going to get caught. It's another whenever you have the entire world listening, or like the entire world can fact check you and say like, hey, you don't actually know what molecules are.
Just techno babble your way through your CEO ship, and then, you know, when you get actually challenged by engineers who know what they're talking about, just cancel the meeting.
Hell yeah. After getting his awards, the state's plan for Doran was to have him fade from the public consciousness. His flight was first announced as a small block on the last page of state-run newspapers, and after that first edition, he was never mentioned again. Quote, public appearances were few, and Romanian television was forbidden to show Prunariu. The only film made by Romanian television about him, A Romanian Flies to the Stars, went into the archives without ever being shown. On the plus side, a lot of Romanians, like just normal people, they did not get the message that they were supposed to forget about him. And they basically send Doran like mountains of fan mail. Unfortunately, he is not allowed to read it or respond to it.
Wait, he can't even read it?
The secret police just kind of like delivers it to him at a military base, and he is instructed to just like sign the envelope, and then we send it home. And they get a little signature. Good for you. This man is being censored for being too cool.
Not just being censored, he's being denied the ability to even read the fan mail. Just, no, fuck you. Sign the envelope. No, you don't get anything.
The government and military couldn't fully get rid of Doran.
I like to imagine just the Russians are calling every once in a while for like a sign of life from Dumitru.
Brezhnev is just like, hey, I didn't get a response to my fan mail. I just got like a signature back. Like, what's up? But yeah, they can't get rid of him. The most they could do until the end of the Ceausescu years was to bury him somewhere in the military bureaucracy. So they invent a new role for him, the main inspector of aerospace activities. And according to Doran, he didn't mind this too much. He thought it was weird that he wasn't getting public attention and was well aware that it was like Ceausescu's fault, but he had a good job and a great wage, which, especially considering how much Ceausescu was mismanaging Romania, that is a big deal. His family was healthy and happy, and he was just kind of like, all right, cool, I wasn't doing this for the fame anyway.
I was going to say, about what time are we talking about now? Because when...
We're talking like 83-ish by now.
Ooh, we're getting close to that austerity.
Hell yeah. Oh, and that's just gonna make things so much worse. And another thing is that he was even allowed to fly in his new role. He flew jet trainers ostensibly as part of his job to like, well, I need to make sure that these are safe, and I need to, I am the director of aerospace activities. A lot of it was just that he loved flying and he wanted to keep his hours up. Unfortunately, the Minister of National Defense realized what he was doing and also remembered what had happened to Yuri Gagarin a few years earlier, and they just banned Doran from flying. Like, no, if you crash, our like whole national symbol, brackets that we are trying to erase, will go away. In response, though, Doran just got a friend of his who was an airbase commander to say like, all right, we're going to make sure that he's not a pilot. He'll be a navigator instead.
He'll get to fly, but he won't be at the controls.
He won't be at the controls.
Okay.
He'll be at the other controls just in case. He'll be the backup. Come on, he's a cosmonaut. He can do that. This guy just wants to fly. The original reason that he became a cosmonaut was that someone offered him a short plane ride and a medical checkup. I wish I had this level of like Zen, like, just being content with this. If I could just get a plane ride every now and then, if I just had a good wage, like, yeah, why not? The government wants to erase me. I don't mind.
From the beginning, he has stayed true.
Yes. Yeah. He reached, I feel like he kind of reached his, not his peak, but like where he always wanted to be was the aerospace engineer kind of stuff. He didn't want to be a career cosmonaut. So as soon as he stops being a cosmonaut, he's just like, all right, I guess I'm gonna fly planes. Why not? He kept up this role even after the Ceausescus were deposed. So he's like, Romania, the Socialist Republic of Romania, stops being a thing. The Ceausescus are deposed. He stays in the Air Force. He's in the new Romanian Air Force until 1998. And the only thing that he leaves for is to become president of the Romanian Space Agency, which he holds this position until 2004.
Admittedly, as the first person up there, I think he knows a little bit more about space.
Yeah. Not to mention he is, like, by this point, an incredibly experienced, like, he knows how spacecraft work, he knows how planes work. He has so much hands-on experience with aircraft. I cannot stress enough. that I do agree with the Romanian idea of picking their Interkosmos guys from engineers as opposed to pilots, not just because I'm biased, but because...
I was about to slam you with bias. Like
engineers
Canada,
are
you
the
listening?
best people.
Canada, are you listening?
Put him in space.
Engineers and podcasters, that's who we need up there. And if you can find someone with both, you might have some trouble. I know some names.
It's always been my dream to pollute the airwaves with my nonsense.
Let me podcast from the end of the Canadarm.
Yeah, being able to pollute the airwaves with my nonsense by putting our podcast on, like, the SETI dish and just blasting it into space. Oh, we need to preempt Voyager and Pioneer, because otherwise they're going to think that we're into, like, porn or weird stuff like that.
You mean we're not?
Of course not, no.
Oh, no,
like,
yeah, of course.
First contact with aliens, the aliens are like, we're going to be there in 1 month for a peaceful meeting between species, and every government is just, like, sending out an emergency alert, hide your porn, do it now, get it out of sight, get it off the internet.
Jokes on you, the aliens are the same way.
Now, he leaves his role as president of the Romanian Space Agency in 2004, and in the time after, he has been Romanian ambassador to Russia. He was the director of the Romanian Office for Science and Technology, he was the president of the European chapter of the Association of Space Explorers, and he was elected chairman of the UN Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. He was also a voice actor in the Romanian dub of WALL-E. He played the welding robot named Bernie.
That's such a fucking whiplash, dude, that you hit me.
I know, and
Hold up.
That right there was an addition I only made like 15 minutes before we started recording. I was trying to find the Romanian dub of WALL-E because I wanted to hear the first Romanian in space have to play a little like beepy bloopy robot.
He did it for the children.
He did.
He continues to be cool, dude. He continues to be the coolest guy in Romania.
All hits, nothing but bangers.
Super recently, but he is still around and he is like still active in like space advocacy and whatnot. He's a very positive influence. Someone's gonna like send me stuff where he like denied the Holocaust or something, and I'm gonna have to like edit all of this out.
Don't fucking do it.
For
Christ's sake, please let him stay pure.
We need to have some guys that have garnered fame and prestige that don't let it all get to their head and pollute them, and then they're like actual shitheels.
Mark in his favor, he has not gone into politics because like 80% of astronauts going into politics are like horrible people. Valentina Tereshkova, horrible person. Svetlana Savitskaya, better person.
We have talked about them and we have acknowledged this already. That they have literally
I'm
turned
blanking
the
on his
dial.
name. I don't just want it to be like the first 2 women in space. Fuck them. They're just like the best examples in my head of horrible space politicians.
I was saying to get into the Duma, you have to be doing some shady shit at this point.
Or like Brazil's first astronaut was fucking Bolsonaro's science minister and a big old climate denier. Yeah. But at least that means that to our knowledge, audience, if you know this, don't ruin the fantasy, please. I'm begging you not to ruin
Audience,
the fantasy.
If you're listening to this, remember, don't ever have heroes.
Don't correct me, because I do. But yeah, that, guys, is the story of Dumitru Prunariu, the first Romanian in space, and a man censored by his government for being too cool. How are we all feeling?
I feel great, actually.
Oh, that's not normal.
I mean,
I fucked up.
I already knew what... I already knew what happened to the Ceausescu so great. They turned into colanders. This dude just kept on winning.
I keep coming back to, like, the contentedness, the way he was, like, you know, obviously it would have also been a very inspiring story if he had, like, fought back against it, but him just kind of going, like, well, you know, everything's going to shit. My family is well cared for. I don't particularly care if Elena is going to take credit for me going to space or something.
I mean, he was still the one who did it at the end of the day, and if all it mattered was it mattered to him, and it wasn't written in the history books that he did it, I mean, at least he knew that he was really the one who did it, you know?
I mean, like, he came out ahead because...
he didn't get assassinated by her either, so, you know.
If you try and erase something from history, most of the time, it has a way of coming back. Another thing is that once the Ceausescus are gone, Dumitru, like Prunariu, he starts going on TV again. He becomes much more popular because people can talk about the fact that, like, hey, do you remember how, like, 15 years ago, like 10 years ago, a Romanian went to space? And then everyone's kind of like, oh yeah, I vaguely remember. I think it was in, like, the back of the newspaper or something.
I wonder if he ever apologized, or if anyone ever apologized for just not letting him read the letters.
Oh, yeah. He has to track those down 20 years later.
Yeah, I wonder if any of the people who wrote the letters still have them.
Probably. I'm sure I could go on eBay and find some of them.
Imagine the double back where they held on to them after all this time and they finally give them to him and he gets to finally read them.
Cosmonaut fan mail never opened.
He finally gets the satisfaction of sending a response.
It's another thing to be satisfied about. The fact that the fucking bitch who tried to censor him is gone. Like,
ooh,
didn't fucking matter, did it, lady?
Also, Nicolae did too. Let's like equal opportunity horrible dictators.
Yeah, the worst power couple.
Oh god, dictator power throuple is a horrible idea.
I shouldn't forget about Nicolae. He's gone too. You're right. But like, it's the fact that they both put all this effort into censoring him and erasing him from existence. Well, guess what? One of them is still around today. Guess who it is?
But that, audience, that has been an episode. Thank you so much for listening to Failure to Launch. Goodbye.
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 Thank you to everyone who have signed up to support the show. And a big shout out to all of our top tier patrons. Our cyborg cats are Ariel Badger Release, August Sun, Boss, Charlie, David R, Ellie M, George 2, the Canadarm that stabs you to death, June, Luke Newcomb, Lupe G, Matt, Mobius Striptease, Noah, Oil Drum, Pat, Spectre Cohen, Tortilla Baron, and Vivek D. Our space dogs are A Union Thug, Ack Guy is Best Guy, Adam H, Angry Old Man Yada Yada, Anthony C, Band User, Baron M, Ben L, Boomzilla, Cantaloupe Was Taken, Chainsaw Snuggling, Charles G, Captain Lag, Daddy Bongo, Dan A, Double Time, Ain't, Aaron, Eric M, Fractal Moonlight, Furious Luddite, James A, James C, Jamie K, John C, Johntastic 20x6, Kara Chameleon, Corbin the Dog, Korolev's Condiments, Lane of the Wired, Lens Wipe, McLean C, Mar, Michael G, Nick S, Norman W, Oliver, Panda, Phoebe H, Randall, Sam A, Sean F, Sean H, Sensual Kazoo, Sean P, Sophie L, Sparks, Spirit of Thunder, That Big Sexy, The Best Sean, Tom M, Tim P, Trash Do, Tyler K, Virash T, Brisk, Will W, Wingsmith, Zath, Zaxum, and Zim.
Albert Count, 101.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Failure to Launch. If you want to follow us, we are Failure to Launch on Blue Sky and FT Launch Pod on Instagram. We also post our episodes with visual aids at Failure to Launch Podcast on YouTube. FTL intro and outro themes were provided by DJ Danarchy.